Ooh. So, breaks.
Wait, I should remind everyone that Red Alert used to cut up Father Figure by George Michael.
There was a lot of cross-pollination.
You can blame Red.
So breaks start to go pop. We won't play all these records, but Owner of Lonely Heart by Yes is probably one of the earliest examples of a break record from, you know, sort of that, from the hip-hop, b-boy era, making its way into pop music. And we know it just by that little drum fill.
But the reason that's in there is because, yes, in the synclavier, that sample was it was a preset, and that's a sample from the Funk Inc. So that was actually, when you bought the sampler, it had that in it.
And because pop music tends to be created by people who behave more like lemmings than they do actual artists, the use of breaks tends to be more focused on a few, and everybody seems to like do the same break at the same time. So just to give you an example, there's a break called Ashley's Roach Clip that Mems will play for you right now. Okay, so keep an eye on this. So the very first use of this in hip-hop, really, that was widespread, not very first, but the most famous use is the Paid in Full remix by Eric B. and Rakim, which was really a huge club song. So
this is a journey into sound.
And then, unfortunately, it was then sampled by these two.
This is a journey into sound.
And they had such a good time making their first record with Ashley's Roach Clip that they decided to make their second record with Ashley's Roach Clip. You don't have that one? That's all right. Then another group, I think in 1990, 1991, called EMF, used the same break. And then it went back to hip-hop, I guess you might call it hip-hop, with PM Dawn. We showed how ahead of the curve they were. Standout ballet too. Really? So another sample very well used in pop music is Lynn Collins' Think About It. Which you heard before. The famous break, and that was made famous by It Takes Two, Rob Ace and DJ Easy Rock, perhaps produced by Stephney, maybe not. Also sampled by Marky Mark and the Funk Sponge and M's favorite, Right Set Fred. These records suck. Alright, okay, I won't make you play them anymore. Go ahead. Alright, so
You made your point.
just to show you how things went down, in 1991, think of the slot, the #1 slot on the Billboard pop charts. There are 52 weeks, right? So the weeks in that slot that can have a song in it that contained a breakbeat were 7 out of the 52 weeks of the year in 1991. The very next year, 12 of those weeks had a song in it that had a breakbeat in it. By 1993, 23 weeks out of the 52 weeks of the year had a song with a breakbeat in it. Breakbeats kind of took a little break for a while, but it came back very, very strong in, 1993. Those 23 weeks, I think, were mostly these three songs: Snow, Informer, Janet Jackson, That's the Way Love Goes, which was an Impeach the President sample, and Mariah Carey, Dream Lover, which was Blind Alley by The Emotions, which we heard before. 1997 was probably the peak use. Over half of the year, there was a breakbeat in the #1 slot. And I'm not even counting the stuff that was at number 5, number 10, number 20. It's just the kind of the easiest way to chart how these records had started to affect pop culture. And also I should mention that there were entire genres of music based on one break record. For example, the genre of jungle or drum and bass is based largely on the Amen Brother break by the Winstons. And do you need me to play this from YouTube? Okay. So I have a little example here. This is one of the earliest jungle records. It's that Amen Brother break just cut up. And almost every jungle record and drum and bass after that used this break.
And it's even faster than the original. Rare sped up break.
So, and that was the original break. So an entire genre of music, almost every song had to have this in it. Another genre, it's called Baltimore Club, which is sort of an outgrowth of hip house that used a lot of that Think About It sample that Rob Bass popularized in 1988. Baltimore Club sounds like this. He was one of those, right?
And the other half of the Baltimore club scene used a breakbeat also provided by Lou called Sing Sing by a group called Gaz. So it was the think beat and the sing sing beat which made Baltimore house, aka Baltimore club music.
So we have about 10 minutes left, and I just wanted, since we have Mr. Ntume here, I really wanted to talk a little bit about copyright in the breaks, not just copyright, just how artists feel about the breaks, because, I mean, in reality, we think of, when we think about a break like Funky Drummer, we think, oh, James Brown, he's been sampled, is James Brown getting paid? But in actuality, it's like Clyde Stubblefield, the drummer, who's playing over and over and over in our heads for 25 years. So, I don't know, Bill, maybe you want to take this part of the discussion.
Very simple. What do you think of all of this? I mean, and you go, and we're going to give you a mic in a second, and maybe Luke can help me out with this. Actually, the Furious Five had a song out around 80 called The Younger Generation. They were called The Younger Generation, right? Called We Rap More Mellow. And they used a track that was based on Stephney Mills' song Put Your Body in It, right? Which was produced and written by Ntume. You move fast forward, of course, to 1983. Now Ntume is now a group on Epic Records, and you have the hit record Juicy Fruit that later becomes, of course, Juicy Fruit for Biggie. It's 32 years later from We Rap More Mellow, and now 29 years later from Juicy Fruit. What do you think of all this?
Well, first of all, I just want to say this has been an extraordinarily informative afternoon for me. I really appreciate the information that you brought. One of the differences, I think, and it was very interesting when you were going to the as R&B and hip hop kind of merged and synthesis. It was almost like hip hop took R&B and microwaved it. We had to cook it, the cats from my era. But what was interesting to me always was the absence of the information for young artists about business. It's the music business. And fortunately, You know, my front ground was jazz. I would call it my background. Before I got into all that, I spent 5 years of my life every night standing to the baddest man on the planet. I played with Miles Davis for 5 years. I also was very fortunate. I come from a musical family, the Heath brothers. My father was a famous saxophonist and my uncles. But I understood the business from the jazz community. And the first thing I understood was this word that Horace Silver was throwing around called publishing. I'm like, well, what's that? You know what I mean? And he explained it to me, so I went out and formed a publishing company. And what I understood about owning your music, see, it's the difference between people recording your music, it's about who owns it. So I will say this, I'll never forget when Puffy came, it's a sampling, actually Juicy wasn't the first song. I think Jay-Z did one of my songs called Coming of Age. He used it, the sample from the thing I did for a trumpet player named Eddie Henson called Inside You. But my deals, what I was doing, cutting my deals for, when the sampling, well, look, first of all, we could never imagine that. How can I imagine being able to sample? There was no mantra for that. So there was no laws either. So a lot of the records in the beginning, James Brown should have had $1 zillion. But nobody, you know, it was something, it's like when HBO was first created, nobody knew what cable was. This is like, okay, you're thinking outside the box. So one thing rule I made was, if you get $1, I get 50 cents. So I made 50% on everything that anybody ever sampled on me. And 50% of the people who sampled the sample of the sample of the sample. It's about the business, but the most important thing is it's about your craft. One of the things I yearn for is more and more young people to learn how to play. Sampling is important, but I call it a tool for creativity. It should never be a substitute for it. Because the more information you have, the broader range you have to draw from. And one of the problems that did start to happen was the glorification of mediocrity. I'm very serious about this. Music, as you will see, I'm feeling all this. And I want to end it with this, because I can't talk about sampling, because there was a big controversy that happened. I want to clear that up. Because Nelson's right here. I was accused of being the dark angel of sampling, like I was tearing it up. All this is not true. Let me tell you what actually happened.
Tell us the sonic story.
That's what I'm going to tell you. That's the song. Y'all remember the song Talking All That Jazz? That was about me. Here's what happened. We were doing a year-end review at KISS FM with Bob Slade. We would do it year-end. Later, he got me out to do it every Sunday now. But we were talking about the things that we were most impressed with. And on the panel, I was on it, Nelson was on the panel, and I said the deepest thing that hit me musically was this song I heard called Bring the Noise. And it's funny, you played it. Sonically, I couldn't figure out, and I'm a well-studied musician. I'm like, how are these guys playing in all these tonal centers? It was a new sound. It was something I'd never heard. I actually pulled my car over. Anyway, make a long story short, we got into the conversation of sampling. And this is what I said. Sampling should be a tool for creativity, not a substitute for it. And I said, if you're going to sample somebody's music, pay them. Because my point was, and trust me, most of the cats early on were not getting a dime. I remember Lonnie Liston Smith calling me when he was glad they sampled it. I said, what? You gotta get paid. Because my thing, it would be just as unfair for me to take Biggie's rap and put it on one of my songs and call it my song. But it was not enough discussion of the business. But anyway, so all of a sudden, I was the guy that was saying I was against sampling. That was not the case. And I was a little harsh, because I was kind of out there on a limb. Because none of the old heads was talking like that. But I told them, I said, look, I ain't scared of limbs, only saws bother me. But the reason I was pushing it, because I'm saying there is a principle. And you can't pass it on. Look, I'll be out, I'm 65, okay? You gotta pass this on, like you were saying. And that's my whole commitment right now. And I just told him, I haven't been to a seminar in 20-something years. I didn't even know you still had them. But on a serious note, one of the biggest problems is the absence of information from my generation to yours. You see, one of the things I say, if you have all age with no youth, your glass is half full. All youth with no age, your glass is half empty. Right now, we got half a glass of music. We need to make that whole. And I'm just going to say that. I don't want to go long. You know how old people go, they talk too much. I'll be available for anything that y'all doing. Anytime I have a chance to talk to young people, I'm down.
Just 30 seconds on my situation. I think the reason I know like I said, when I was 3 years old, I was introduced to bongos and I graduated to congas after that. But thinking when everything started evolving, especially in the Bronx at that time, there was no way that students can get back into having chorus, having piano lessons like we have in school back in the late 60s, early 70s. So the best way I can put it is what Flash said. Flash said he made the turntable an instrument for himself. So by him taking that and bringing the zuga zuga, the rub, or whatever you want to call it, into the game, now let's fast forward to sampling. Like you said, you couldn't hear sonically what it was with that. I would say it was the same reaction people had to Jimi Hendrix when he had the feedback. When he was on BCC playing feedback, there was a crowd, they stood still for like 30 seconds. And then what happened? An uproar happened. First of all, he put the guitar upside down, which made no sense to nobody either, right? He took it upon himself to say, let me create something and go against the grain, and that's what we did with the two turntables, actually holding the record in the middle of the record and make it, back in the days, you put a finger on the record and it would beat up by the parents. You took that first one, then you bring it back and forth, but Theodore did back and forth and made it something that could, like you said, you jazz, right? The thing with jazz, what's the best thing with jazz that makes it full? Filling those fills, filling between that kick and the snare, that little percussion you put in there, or whatever little riff you put in there. That's what the scratching made for us, adding notes to something that didn't have any notes in it. And then with the sampling craze, I mean, you get guys, I don't care what anybody says, you can't tell me Pete Rock does not kill a SP1200. Guys like Lord Professor does not kill an SP1200. You got the RZA, incredible. What the Bomb Squad did with the grunt and bringing that to the front and hearing that outrageous noise, I figured, like, what the heck is that? And all of a sudden you're gonna bop your head to it. All it was a note somebody they took it, they put it into a sequence and made it into their own thing. And I'm pretty sure a lot of musicians could understand, especially that play something when they hear jazz. Jazz has an aspect of thing that makes it so warm when you hear little things coming out of nowhere that you never expect to happen. And that's what happened with hip hop and sampling. And that's why I got involved in doing the breaks, because I say, if this is going to maintain to what it's supposed to be, let me give them the right ingredients that were there from the forefront. Let's say you're going to create gumbo, you're not going to miss one ingredient that you're going to say, it's not going to taste this. You know what I'm saying? Or you're going to create grits and cook it for 5 minutes and not make it happen, it's not going to taste this. Or you take a nice, paella and you forget the seafood. It's a lot of different things. You gotta make sure that you have all the ingredients. It's the perfect example. Like Run DMC was created, what happened to Jam Master Jay? Jam Master Jay was there from the beginning. Well, corporate America said, nah, this doesn't look good because he's not doing anything. I mean, he's not doing anything.
I just want to say this in response to that. I agree with 100% because as I grew, I began to understand it because, there was a big division, between R&B and funk and hip hop. It was actually the same thing, it was just different shades of the same blue. But my concern was and always will be, you must master technology. Don't let the technology master you. And we got to the point where you don't have to know how to sing. I had a problem with that. Okay? Because there's something about the auto-tunes and all that. And I'm for the technology because in reality, when we were going into the synthesizer, I was using all that. So, I'm sure when we had the string sounds, there's a lot of violin players that had attitude. We didn't have to hire a whole orchestra. But there's a difference when I'm listening to 36 strings, and it means a difference.
100%.
Yeah.
100%. That's the reason why it doesn't sound good when you try to duplicate, let's say, for instance, a James Brown actual feel of a record, when you can sample the whole thing. The grittiness of the whole vinyl
I want to talk to you after this. No, I want to, not a challenge. I would like to collaborate with you. I got a lot of stuff from Miles Davis when we were on the corner period.
So let's get some final thoughts from Brian, then we're going to roll out with a little special treat I made for y'all, and then please do stay for, I think Questlove is coming up next. It's the first time I've ever opened up for Questlove, so very nice.
No, I actually, more than anything, I have a question that I wanted to ask before, which is, kind of the generational thing, because we have a lot of really interesting people from all generations here. Is there an instance that anyone's talked to an artist where, someone from the 60s, 70s showed up at a park jam or at, like a jam in the early 80s and kind of saw what was happening? Because unless you actually saw it happen, I'd be just curious if someone showed up. One was Unity with Bambaataa and James Brown was 84. But are there any stories of people showing up and I really appreciate what you guys are doing. I didn't understand it before, but now I understand, kind of like you're talking about.
Didn't Sylvia Robinson do that and then make Sugar Hill?
I just don't. How you doing, Nelson? George. One of the interesting threads of the conversation is the generational divide. And I jump back real quick to the beginning, that era when you talked about the... Get on the mic. Get on the mic. The era that they were talking about when BreakBeat went away and it became about making these studio records. I was roommates with one of those producers, a guy named Robert Ford, who helped produce the Curtis Blow records. And there was a huge cultural misunderstanding that went on through all of that whole era from the early 80s. Everyone in the mainstream R&B world wanted access to what was happening in the street. But they were not willing to concede creative control. So what happened in Sugar Hill and happened with Curtis Blow, I was literally in studios at Green Street Recording, a few blocks away from here, where Russell Simmons would be in there with Robert Ford and his partner J.B. Moore and Larry Smith, who was the bass player on those records. And they would be having arguments about, no, Russell says less music. They felt Curtis should be more musical. And they made the breaks and they made Chris's rapping. But over time, Curtis became less relatable to the hip-hop audience, which was really into beats. So Curtis had a run, but he didn't become the star that he could have. And the ideas that happened with Run DMC were what Russell always wanted to do, which was bring it more back to where the street was. But it wasn't necessarily, you say corporate control. I think that was truly an aesthetic misunderstanding. They just were not, these people were going to Leviticus, which was the Midtown Club, or they were not going uptown or downtown to the different places. And they just were afraid. There was a generational battle. And that's where that thing happened with hip-hop and R&B. It wasn't simply a corporate, we don't like this, because it was literally a Cavassier versus an Old English 800. Distinction. And it was political because there was a acceptance of middle-class values. To them, going back to these kind of beats, the James Brown stuff, was a way going backwards. They were going into a cleaner, literally the sound of Cavassier R&B, of Ashford Simpson and Kashif, not dissing anybody, but to say. So when the sampling came in, it overturned. Finally, it finally made it clear to everyone that the aesthetic of hip hop was the new aesthetic, and that we couldn't go backwards anymore. But it took a long time, and a lot of structural battles within the industry and even within the aesthetic of the black community before it finally came full circle.
But what you don't understand is that what you're saying isn't necessarily true. What really happened is that you cut off a whole population that was moving and grooving. Funny you should mention Kashif, because I made a Kashif video and I made a Ramones video at the same time. And one day I was walking in Times Square wearing this jacket. This jacket's 35 years old. And a white kid comes up to me with his knees all cut out, and he goes, "Wow, you're in the Ramones video, wow!" And then the black guy comes up, and he goes, "You're in the Kashif video." And I go, "Yeah." And they take one look at each other and start punching each other out. And we all used to hang out. It was Keith Haring, it was even Larry Fishburne. Everybody used to hang out together, and we did rock and roll, and we did soul. One night it was Bruce Springsteen, one night it was Diana Ross. But when we came to you, you looked at us like we were garbage. And we still got the basement tapes, and we're still rocking and rolling, and it was all good.
Personally, I don't.
I'm saying basically, whether it was the hip-hop world or whether it was the R&B world, and particularly if you were a woman, no one wanted to talk to you. And we didn't care. We just did our old thing. And it's great because what? You could go to Love Changes, you could see me there, You could go to the Ramones, who covered the Chambers Brothers tune Time, and you could see me there. And the proof is out there, and I didn't even touch it. The kids showed it to me, and we were all rocking, and I still got the reel-to-reel tapes of all the music that we made and all the good times we had while you're still playing the segregation game to this day. It's still like that. And it's sad, because it wasn't really like that. A lot of us had a great, great time.
Thank you. Well, listen, that's the whole other panel, I think, for next year's VIP. Listen, we do have to roll out. For the next couple minutes, just enjoy this little sort of summary, The Strange Lives of Breaks. I want to thank Bill Stephney, Brian Coleman, Joe Schloss, BreakBeat Lou, especially operator everyone here, keeping it moving. Check this out.
Oh, 1 second. I mean, we came up with you. I mean, it's like Bill Stephney said. You know, we gotta thank Dan for bringing this together. You know, because I know. I mean, I would not make any insight as a subject matter or something was incredible.
Thank you very much. Well,
thanks, Steph.
And BreakBeat Lou has a party on Wednesday.
here we go.